Carlos Mendoza's under fire by fans. The losses keep piling up while the player blame is simply non-existent from the skip. You pair this with plenty of questionable moves from the manager, and that is why he is under fire by fans. That's exactly what we're going over only here on Mets Digest. I'm your host today, Mike Duda. We're going to talk about Carlos Mendoza and all of his questionable moves, but first we got to talk about some subscribers, and that being the fact that 69.4% of you that watch these videos aren't one. So please do me a favor, just a favor here at Mets Digest, and hit that free subscribe button. That way we can bring content to you about the amazing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. And we are going to actually start it off with the only positive that I've seen of late from Carlos Mendoza. As you guys probably well know, I did not like the original hiring of Carlos Mendoza before the 2024 season, and I agreed with it all the way through the first half of the season. In fact, I vividly remember going to Pittsburgh to go watch the Mets on the road. We were coming home on that Monday. The Mets were playing an afternoon game, and in a tie game, he decided to go to Eric Orz, who he's having a great year with the Tampa Bay Rays this year, don't get me wrong, but he was just not the right selection at the time. He ended up giving up a boatload of runs, didn't even record an out. It was his first MLB debut experience, which we'll get into that in just a little bit, with a Met that almost made his MLB debut yesterday in a very controversial and questionable move like Mendoza made in this game. Mets ended up losing, but we all know they went on a magical run in the second half, and it all worked out well, and that is why I was on the Mendoza train for a while, stayed on it throughout the first half of 2025, but with a lot of very, very questionable moves and some very bad press conferences, to be completely blunt, I'm no longer the biggest fan of Carlos Mendoza. I wouldn't say I'm fully off the train yet, but I am definitely getting there to being off the Mendoza train. But one positive thing that I've seen of late, he is switching up the lineup. That was something that I always praised Mendoza for. I didn't love the way he handled the pitching staff. I still don't like the way he does so, but he usually does a good job with the lineup. He made the necessary switch last year to put Francisco Lindor in the leadoff spot. That did wonders for him. Then it wasn't working this year, so he put Lindor back in the 2, worked him in the 3 as well, moved Pete Alonso to the cleanup spot, Juan Soto to the 3. All of that worked. But as you guys well know, because I've made videos on this before, the Fab Four is not hitting well of late. Lindor has gotten hot. He's hitting the ball hard, but he's still not hitting incredibly of late. He's 6 for his last 20, which is good. It's 300 average, but it's not what you would hear from Mendoza. It seems like the way Mendoza's speaking, he's hitting 500 plus over his last couple of games. And yes, he's hitting the ball hard, but regardless, Mendoza made the move, put him in the leadoff spot. Soto in the 2 today, Alonso in the 3, Nimmo in the 4, Mark Vientos in the 5, Jeff McNeil, usually who's in the 5, is now in the 6, and actually Luis Torrens, who's almost always in the 9 slot when he catches, is actually hitting 8th with Brett Beatty 9th. Mets are on right now. Last I checked, it was 1-0. I'll get you another update before this game ends. But the other thing that I have to talk about before we start talking about the negatives for Mendoza, as much as fans want him to be fired, it probably won't happen. Carlos is the second winningest manager in New York Met history with a .551 winning percentage. And you got Willie Randolph, who, if you're not familiar, was the manager from 05 to 08. He's third on the list, which is the only reason why I might see a potential firing of Mendoza, because of the way they fired Randolph way back when. They were going out on a West Coast trip, the Mets. They're coming off a win, and then they get into the hotel room. The general manager calls him down and basically says, hey, you're fired, at approximately 3:11 Eastern Standard Time. Of course, around midnight West Coast time. But he is the third most winningest manager in Met history at a .544. So it's not completely off the table that Mendoza might get fired. But let's go ahead and talk about the negatives before we do anything else. Yesterday was terrible. Horrible, horrible game. As you can tell, the Mets got 4 hits. They had 1 run in the first inning that they got off a walk, and then a wild pickoff attempt, a stolen base, sac fly, the whole 9 yards. That worked well in the first inning. Finally, small ball. I was super happy. They played some small ball too after getting 2 hits in the second, and I was like, hey, maybe the Mets are going to win this game. I might even make a video about how I love small ball. Like, that would be awesome. Mets are implementing small ball. It's going to be great. It's going to be a great game. Well, they got another hit in the third. They got another hit in the fourth, and that was it. That was all the hits that the New York Mets got yesterday. They had their last 14 batters recorded consecutively out. Terrible. Absolutely terrible. So let's turn it over to the skip. What did he have to say about this offense? Well, in the postgame, he responded to Steve Gelb's first question. That was, the last 14 batters were retired. What did you think of the offense tonight? Well, he said, it seems like after we didn't capitalize on that second inning, when Lindor had the bases loaded, he hit a bullet up the middle, 105 miles an hour, I think. And they ended up making a play. Yes, they did. Lindor hit it hard with the bases loaded and 1 out. Ended up being a double play. I won't blame him for that. Lindor hit it hard. But after that, I think, just other than the Soto walk, we didn't create anything. I don't think we hit many balls hard. Lindor, he had a few of them, but we just didn't put anything together. They got us today, and we got to turn the page, obviously, because it wasn't that good today. And yes, Mendoza always says this. That's the problem that I have in this post-game conference. He never goes out and says about a specific player, yes, he's in a slump. Yes, he's struggling. This guy isn't doing well on the mound. He never says things like that. He always tries to work his way around the subject and always tries to find the positives, which overall I like. I like finding the positives in life, but when you're the manager of a team, let alone the New York Mets, it's a big market team, sometimes you got to say, yes, this player is struggling. And sometimes, yes, you have to put a player on the bench, which we'll get to in just a little bit. It's almost the same thing on the other side of New York with the Yankees. A lot of their fans are under fire right now about Aaron Boone. They are really angry with Boone lately because he's more of a friend than a manager. Again, like Mendoza, these guys just aren't harping the players when they need to, and that's a problem on both sides of New York baseball in terms of the managers. So let's turn it over to the second question that Steve Gelbs asked. He said, I know we've asked you about this at times throughout the year, but how perplexing is it to see the way that you guys have struggled consistently against lefties this season? Well, he said, we got really good hitters. Again, always finds the positives. Good, but sometimes you got to find the negatives. When you look at Lindor's numbers last year against lefties, Pete, Vientos, and then you see a night like tonight where Lindor hits, I don't know, maybe 3 balls, 110, 105 off the bat. Vientos had some really good at-bats. Eventually, it's going to turn. But as a whole, we're having a hard time putting a rally together and being consistent against lefties. So again, we continue to believe in those guys. They're really good hitters, and whether it's lefties or righties right now, they got our numbers. But I'm anticipating this to turn here quickly. Again, he's way too positive when the Mets have been really, really bad of late. They are 1-7 in their last 8 games, and he's talking about last year. How many times have I said on this channel, 2024 does not matter for 2025. These are two completely separate years. Last year simply does not matter. As let's go over Lindor's at-bats. Yes, he was correct in saying he hit a bunch of balls over 105 miles an hour. First at-bat, he walked. His second at-bat hit a 104.3 mile an hour double play ball up the middle that you heard from in that first quote from Mendoza. Third at-bat was 111 off the bat, a line out to center, and then he wrapped it up with a 104 ground out to first. So yes, Lindor was hitting well, but Mendoza talks about the team struggles against lefties, yet this guy is on the bench against the lefty. I know that Cedric Mullins is lefty. I understand that. But look at the splits. You can see him on your screen right now here in 2025. He is a significantly better hitter against lefties than righties, and sometimes that's the case. Sometimes a lefty pitcher is actually better against the right-handed hitter, or vice versa. Sometimes the left-handed batter is good against the left-handed hitter. Cedric Mullins is exactly that. He's hitting nearly 300 against the lefties, 847 OPS. He's having a great year against lefties. Why is Carlos Mendoza keeping him on the bench against the lefty? It makes no sense, and then he's complaining that the Mets aren't playing well against the lefties. Well, Carlos, that's on you. You have to put out the best lineup against a particular pitcher, specifically from the left side or the right side, and he didn't do that. He put Starling Marte in the leadoff spot, and he had Tyrone Taylor out in the outfield. I know Taylor got an RBI base hit, but he had Taylor out in center instead of Mullins, even though Mullins is mashing against lefties this year. That is on Mendoza, as let's quickly turn it over to the last question that he heard in the post-game conference, because I want to stay on the topic of the offense. So let's stay on track there. It's been a couple of rough days from Nimmo was the question. Just what are you seeing with his at-bat recently? And he said, like he said, a tough couple of games swinging through fastballs. Opposing teams are doing a good job of attacking him and game planning against him. You got to give those guys credit. Nims has been swinging the bat. Other than the past 2 days, he's been one of the most consistent guys in our lineup, but I feel like they're executing their game plan and they're giving him a hard time. Again, he's trying to find the positives. Sometimes you have to say, yes, Brandon Nimmo is in a slump lately. Sometimes you got to bench him. We'll get to that in just a second. And it's no doubt that he's been struggling of late in the first 2 games of the series against the Guardians, not including what's happened so far in today's game. He is 0 for 9 with 6 strikeouts. He is striking out 66.7% of the time over those 2 games. I know it's a very small sample size, but you compare that to the season when he's striking out 23.8% of the time and his career at 26.2. Yes, it is significantly worse. Now, let's turn it over to the opposite problem. I've talked about how Mendoza never benches someone. Again, we'll talk that in further discussion in just a little bit. We'll go into detail about that. But let's talk about the pitching staff and an opposite problem. The fact that he's letting his guys stay in there too long. As the third question was about Clay Holmes. Very simply, 75 pitches. Everything okay there? Well, he said, yeah. We're set up bullpen-wise. Their third time through the order, he was really good the first time through the lineup. Yes, he was. In fact, he had a no-hitter going and a perfect game going through 3 innings. And then we saw the second time that in the 4th inning, they gave him a hard time. So, I knew it was going to be aggressive there. The game's tied, and we were set up with our bullpen guys. And we got the matchups we wanted. He did his part. He did his job. Well, clearly he didn't get the matchups you wanted because the bullpen ended up giving up 1 more run, and the Mets lost the game. Now, I don't understand this at all. Clay Holmes last night, 5 innings, 3 hits, 2 earned runs, 1 walk, 6 Ks, 75 pitches. He was pitching great. If you want to say Clay Holmes is a starter and you and David Stearns want to refuse to put him back in the bullpen, then he has to be a starter that can throw 90-plus pitches and go 6 innings. That was the one time that someone could have reached the 6th inning, not named David Peterson, since June 7th. Yet Mendoza took him out early for I don't even know what reason. So, if you want to treat him like a starting pitcher, you have to treat him in-game like a starting pitcher and let him go as far as he can, 90, 100-plus pitches every time he's out there. If not, put him in the bullpen. Nobody is going to harp on you for putting him in the bullpen. I mean, look at his career stats. Yes, he's thrown more innings this year than he ever has by far. 122 and a third. Most he's ever thrown before this was 70. But still, you have to let him go the distance if you're going to consider him a starting pitcher. It's not rocket science. As with that, let's turn it over to the last quote that we're going to hear from Mendoza today. And the last question that we're going to hear, that question was, in the 7th with Rogers, just what did you see from him? Well, Mendy said, obviously got the 2 quick outs, and then he's a ground ball guy, and a couple of ground balls found holes. He gets 2 outs, and then before you know it, a ground ball gets through the other way, a bloop single, and then the ball up the middle. That's exactly what Rogers is. The guy is going to get ground balls from lefties and righties, and today they found holes. Now, I feel bad for Rogers because he's pitched so much of late, and now he got the loss. He got the loss in last night's game because he's now on back-to-back days of pitching, and he pitched again on Saturday. That's 3 out of the last 4 days that he's pitching, and the Mets haven't been winning baseball games. Why? They were destroying the Giants. Look at that, 12-6. Why is he coming in that game of all games? And very similarly, let's look at Ryan Helsley's game log. Why? Why is he coming into the game last night? I get it, maybe the night before on Monday, it was in the 10th inning. You want to keep the game where it is. You want to try and keep that a 5-5 game. But again, Helsley got the loss last night, or 2 nights ago rather, because of some bad defense. And then, of course, Rogers gets the loss last night because he's pitched so much of late. Helsley's not even coming in setup situations. These 2 players, it makes no sense what Carlos Mendoza is doing with them. And it works to this theme that I've mentioned before. He never gives anyone a day off. Brandon Nimmo has played 110 out of 114 games. Only missed 4 games because of what? Injury. Francisco Lindor, 112 out of 114. What games did he miss? Injury. Juan Soto, 112 out of 114. What did he miss? Injury. Pete Alonso, every game this year. Sometimes guys need a break. They simply need a day off, and then you won't see these horrendous slumps. Let them get a day off. The baseball season is very, very long. Let their bodies get what they need. And speaking of which, he left Sean Manaea in way too long on Monday night. Look at that. In fact, last night, you could see what happened in that inning on your screen. It went disastrous very, very quick for Sean Manaea, and I get it. But right there, right where it says Santana single to right, after that, you needed to bring in Brooks Raley rather than waiting for the Arias homer, another K, and then the Rocchio single. You needed to bring him out 3 batters before he ended up getting out of the game. And that would have prevented the 3-run homer. And maybe, as you can tell from the game log, maybe the Mets would have won that 7-6 game and not taken it to extra innings. Maybe they would have won 5-3 or 5-4. But speaking of leaving guys in too long, Dom Hamill was up last night in the bullpen. Why? I get it. He was up in this situation because after Brooks Raley came in, he might have pitched the 7th, and the Mets made a comeback in the bottom of the 6th to make it 5-3. But last night was a 3-2 game. It makes no sense. Remember what I was saying about that story with Eric Orrs? That was exactly what happened last night. It was a 3-2 game. Dom Hamill was almost coming into the game, who was just recalled from AAA. We'll get into that in a future video because something happened with Dom Hamill, so stay tuned for that. But it just makes no sense. And then we continue. Look at this. Frankie Montas will make his next scheduled outing Saturday in Milwaukee, Carlos Mendoza said. So it looks like he wants him to start, but Met officials are discussing the idea of using an opener ahead of him instead of letting Montas start the game. That wasn't Mendy's decision. That is the front office. That's not Carlos Mendoza. I don't get it. You have the love affair with Montas, and you have all these problems that we've mentioned. Someone needs to be the blame. Jeremy Hefner, maybe. How about the hitting coaches, Jeremy Barnes, Eric Chavez? Or maybe it really is Carlos Mendoza's fault. Let's go ahead and take a look at the wild card race because the Mets have been putrid of late. Again, June 12th was the best day to be a Met fan. They were 5.5 up in the division, 21 games above 500. Now they are just 12 games above 500, and they are 2.5 out of the division. In fact, they are tied with the San Diego Padres right now for the last wild card spot. Not even the first, not even the second, the last wild card spot. They're only 3 games up on the Cincinnati Reds. This is getting disastrous really, really quick. Let's turn it over to an Instagram post to wrap this up from Amazing Army to just further prove how bad this team has been of late. They say it's been an absolutely brutal stretch for the Mets since mid-June. They have a record of 18-26 since June 13th, one of the worst marks in baseball in that span. Mets have a worse record than the White Sox, who broke the record for the worst record in baseball history last season. The Mets also only have one more win than the lowly Colorado Rockies, who barely have 30 wins. Ever since the Rays series at home in June, the Mets have been a completely different team. After having a historically good start to the season, it's been all downhill since. And look, I'll be honest, this guy, Carlos Mendoza, he might be to blame, or at least is partially to blame. So go down there in the comment section. Let me know what you think. Do you agree that Mendoza might actually be a problem? Are you off the Mendoza train? Do you think he should be let go? I think you need a spark. Again, I've mentioned Hefner, I've mentioned Barnes, and I've mentioned Chavez. Maybe you fire one of them, maybe 2 of them, maybe all 3 of them instead of firing Mendoza, and that motivates Mendoza to manage better, motivates the players to play better. Who knows, but the Mets need a spark right now. They need something to happen as they're losing 3-0 right now in the bottom of the 4th. David Peterson was on the mound too. It was a guy that we always trust, and they're already down 3-0, so hopefully they make a comeback. But if not, I think the question grows ever so more. Do you want Mendoza gone? I feel like it might be the right option, or at least get rid of a Hefner, Barnes, or Chavez. But again, let me know in the comment section if you agree or disagree. Thank you so much, always, for watching. Unfortunately, that's all the time I have for you in this one. And let's go, Mets.